We're very pleased to have as our guest today Miklos Radvanyi, and he is going to speak to us concerning recent developments of the church in Hungary. I think it would be an understatement for me to say that we live in a very exciting time in the history of the church. I could say that in the 15 years that I've been associated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and have observed it as carefully as I possibly could, that I have seen a tremendous change in the scope and the vision of the work. And we're very pleased to have here today Dr. Miklos Radvanyi, who has played a role in one of the most exciting developments in the missionary work of the church, in assisting the church in its legal recognition in the country of Hungary. Let me give you some background information on our guest. He received his doctorate at the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. That was at in the field of political and legal sciences. He later took a degree at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where he did a master's in comparative law. He later did a master's degree in international public policy at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, also in Washington, D.C. He is currently serving as a senior specialist on Eastern Europe in the Library of Congress. I asked before we came in, I was visiting with Miklos, and I asked, how would you describe your particular role? And he, in his own words, describes himself as something of an ad hoc advisor, called to advise those authorities of the church who've been involved in the negotiations of legal recognition of the church, not only in Hungary, but also in some other Eastern European countries. Miklos has indicated to me that he would like to talk for about 25 to 30 minutes and then open up the forum to questions from the audience. The class period ends at 10 minutes until 12. Those of you who need to leave at that time, feel free to leave, but we will continue the question and answer session up until 12 o'clock. Let's please welcome to the David M. Kennedy Center and to Brigham Young University, Miklos Radvanyi.
Thank you very much. It speaks a lot for the McLean Ward, my ward for over 10 years, that Lou Kramer will come after me. Lou is in the bishopric. He's the first counselor and a very fine gentleman. I have known him for years now. I'm a little bit embarrassed here because I didn't know that President Kennedy will be present, and he is, of course, a great authority on Eastern Europe, has done a marvelous job as the mission president of the Vienna East European Mission. I met him in Budapest, and we had a great time, and I guess because it was so successful, our president. I hope that I won't disappoint him today with my speech. I had an old-fashioned professor for criminal law in Hungary who was a professor even before the communists took over, and his most important admonition to us was those who intrude upon the time of others are capable of committing even more heinous crimes. So I don't want to become a criminal here at the Y, and would restrain myself, although my natural inclination is to speak and speak and speak. But I would like to give you the floor and would like you to ask questions which might be more of an interest to you than to me. When we approach the question of the recent developments in Hungary, I think that we can neatly divide the topic into three areas. The one, the general political situation in Central Eastern Europe, and I mean also in the Soviet Union, the particular problems and challenges that we faced in Hungary, and thirdly, what lies ahead. The best thing to describe the situation in Central and Eastern Europe, because it is so sad, to tell you a joke. An American journalist, let's say from the New York Times, it's my favorite liberal newspaper that I like to criticize and laugh about, went to Moscow, and a journalist also goes to the zoo to see the animals. Animals and politicians have some proclivity. And so he went to the zoo and saw a huge red banner over a cage. And the banner read, "Long live Glasnost, long live Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of our party." And in the cage he saw a lion and a white lamb. And the lion, as lions do during the day, was asleep, and the lamb was grazing, peacefully in the same cage. And he was absolutely taken. He said, "Here's the proof that Gorbachev's policies do work, and glasnost is practiced even in the zoo of Moscow." So, without any further ado, he flew back to New York and wrote a glowing article about the success of glasnost. The article was duly printed. Next day he received a phone call. The gentleman introduced himself as a refusenik who was kicked out of the Soviet Union recently, and asked the journalist, "Sir, are you aware that they have to change the lamb every night?" So basically, that is the general political situation. It is very, very bad. All the regimes in the Soviet Union and Central Eastern Europe is totally bankrupt. They are through, both politically and economically. More importantly, all these countries face a very serious social crisis. Why is it so important? It is important because social crisis means that people are unhappy, people are unfulfilled, and people do not have hope. And it has been the result of what I would call in English the policy of depoliticization. I know that that's a very ugly word in English, but I cannot express it otherwise. Namely, that the regimes hold the monopoly of power and do not let the average citizen to get involved in any degree in the decision-making process of the political life throughout the Central Eastern Europe. Now, that means that people do not have anything to rely upon to develop themselves with and to communicate with each other in a way that will satisfy their basic human needs. And in this context, I would say that is why these regimes are so inhumane. We have had and we have dictatorships and authoritarian regimes throughout the world, but none exhibits the degree of inhumanity or lack of any humanity than what we call the communist regimes, mistakenly, because these regimes are neither Marxists, nor communists, nor socialists. These regimes are purely and authentically Russian. And that Russian political regime, which was adopted by Lenin and then worked out by Stalin, was forced upon the rest of Central Eastern Europe when the Red Army basically conquered these countries. So do not be mistaken. These regimes are not Marxists. not socialist and not communist. Those are inherently Russian. What are the two major characteristics that are important if we would like to understand why these people so hunger to receive the gospel and to hear about religion? And the two characteristics, as I see them, are, first of all, that people are subjugated, are not treated as human beings, are not provided basic freedoms. They are only provided basic necessities to be able to work on behalf of the elite. And secondly, that internal security and the military are the most important mainstays of those regimes. This means that all the money is pumped into keeping up a highly ready military and a highly oppressive and sophisticated internal security force. And don't be mistaken, all the money that we give these countries do not go into developing consumer goods industries. It goes to maintain, to pay for the security services and to the military, to maintain the elite in power against the explicit will of their people. So in this situation, it is no wonder that these people hunger for something which is more humane. And what is more humane than the gospel? What is more humane than the Lord himself, who is our Heavenly Father, and we are his children? And these people know that. And these people would like to join the millions of others in the free world, and particularly here in the United States, to worship the Lord. Unfortunately, the established churches before our church has been recognized in Hungary, excuse me again for the strong expression, prostituted themselves with the authorities. The Catholic Church cannot name a single bishop without government's approval. And they are so afraid of doing anything against the regime that they do not really serve their flock. It is more politicking than endowing the average Central East European with the Spirit of the Lord, with the teachings of the Lord. They are almost paralyzed by fear. Two reasons that I think that the church has been welcomed by every Hungarian and will be welcomed, and the mission will become one of the most prosperous missions in the world. That they know that that's the true church. Our church is not tainted. It is not tainted the same way as other churches are in Hungary. We are not compromised. And secondly, what is more important, that our message is the message of free agency. Our message is the message of individual freedom. Our message is direct communication between the individual and Heavenly Father. Can you imagine, in a country which has been devastated by communism or so-called communism, in which there is no freedom, there is no direct communication except direct control from above, but no direct communication from below. This message can in itself make a big difference. I would say a revolutionary difference. And that is why Hungarians looking forward to hear the message of the Lord from the missionaries. President Kandi was present at that first meeting, which I guess Elder Nelson termed as a fireside, at the Hotel Hyatt Atrium. And an old lady stood up after President Kandi spoke, Elder Nelson spoke, and I guess President Ringer spoke. And in tears, with tears in her eyes, she said that she waited for that moment for 45 years, actually, since Hungary became a colony of the Soviet Union, to be able to see and hear the apostle of the Lord on Hungarian soil. And I will never forget that. I still get a little bit emotional about it. Elder Nelson, in his sweet style, he stood up, walked over to that old little lady, must have been about 4'7" or 4'8", and Elder Nelson is quite tall, hugged her, kissed her on both cheeks, and told her, "Sister, welcome back." And President Kandi knows that. And to me, it signified both the hunger of the people and the appreciation of the people to the Lord, that what they waited for so long became a reality. And on the other hand, the apostle of the Lord, who brings the kind of sweetness and the kind of love which has been totally missing in the official dealings of the regime with its own citizens. As an apostle of the Lord, who is basically a member of the governing quorum of the church, goes over, hugs that lady, and utters those very simple words, "Welcome back, sister." And I think that gesture and that sentence changed the entire atmosphere. It was a little bit tense, it was a little bit official, because the Hungarians didn't know, who listens to the fireside, who is watching them. But with that, everything disappeared. And there was just the limitless and absolute love of the Lord, conveyed by Elder Nelson, President Kandi, and President Ringer. As far as individual strategy is concerned toward Hungary, we knew that as all communist countries, they are economically bankrupt. They cannot expect any help from the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union is also in dire need of obtaining Western credits. So the discussions progressed on two tracks. The one with the Secretary for Religious Affairs, Mr. Miklos, and there was a second track with the first Deputy Prime Minister, who in addition now became the Minister of Trade, Mr. Marjai. And it was, I don't want to go into details, it was very quick and very pleasant meeting. In the afternoon, the Parliament meeting was also very good. Let me just tell you again one episode of our first meeting with Mr. Miklos. I was not privileged to be present when Elder Nelson dedicated the land to the Lord. On the top of the Mount Galiad. So I understand President Kandi told me the story that Elder Nelson, upon arrival in Budapest, and that was the first sunny, cloudless day, as the Hungarians told me, asked the Hungarians, which is the highest point, and it was Mount Galiad. So Elder Nelson, accompanied by President Conley and President Ringer, drove up and dedicated the land to the Lord and asked for the blessing of the Lord upon the nation, upon the people, and upon the country. And Elder Nelson started out by saying that he did that to the Minister of Religious Affairs, Mr. Miklos. And I was watching Mr. Miklos, and Mr. Miklos, who is a hardened communist, I mean, he is dealing with churches for over 30 years. And he was put there not because, he was so spiritual, but because he is a hardened communist. And that man's eyes, as the eyes of that little lady, were filled with tears that the Hungarian won out over the communist. And that has been the sweetness of the Spirit, that everybody, even that communist, felt that here is the apostle of the Lord. And that was what Elder Nelson really conveyed to everybody. That sweetness, that all-encompassing, all-embracing love of the Lord. And that was the beginning. And then Mr. Miklos was just as pliable as possible. There were no discussions. There were no arguments. There were no problems. In 2 hours, Elder Nelson and Mr. Miklos agreed in the principles of the relationship between the church and state. The afternoon meeting in the parliament was a piece of cake. Mr. Moria wanted to know how much money the church might spend in Hungary. And although Elder Nelson didn't say anything, concrete, he just told him that the church will spend the money necessary to fulfill the mission of the Lord in Hungary. Which I don't know whether Mr. Moria was satisfied with, but that's the answer he got. Basically, the meeting was very cordial. It lasted over an hour. And when Elder Nelson left Budapest, everybody knew that he accomplished his work and that the church will be recognized. It was just a question of time, negotiating the details. And as it really happened, the church was officially recognized as of June the 1st, 1988 in Hungary. Because of the reasons I stated, I do feel that Central Eastern Europe is a great field where missionary work can be accomplished. They need us. They expect us. They appreciate us. And I pray daily that the Lord will give us the opportunity to spread throughout Central Eastern Europe and establish not the Vienna East European mission, but let's say the Warsaw or the Budapest Central East European mission. I know that it will come. Maybe it will come in 3 years, maybe it will come in 5 years, maybe it will come in 10 years. But the Lord's work definitely will go ahead. And I think there is no return. There is no return. We have a foothold in Central Eastern Europe, and it will be almost impossible to reverse that development. If it will be reversed, not just the people will suffer, but the regimes, I guarantee you, will suffer equally. That's basically what I wanted to say, and I will take your questions on any topic, politics, the church, or what's going on in Hungary. President Conley.
You were a little modest about your role in all of this thing. The Premier Kadar didn't call President Kimball or President Benson. Someone contacted you in Washington. Could you talk about how the wheels got rolling?
Yeah. Actually, it was Elder Nelson whom I met in the house of a dear friend of mine, Beverly Campbell, Pearson Beverly Campbell. Beverly heads the communication department of the church in Washington. They have a very spacious home. And it was Sunday morning when we sat down, and Elder Nelson said that he prayed about it and he feels that Eastern Europe is ready to be opened up. And so we discussed the possibilities, and we felt that Hungary would be the first country which could be opened up. And as it was I guess December 1986, and I was scheduled to fly to Hungary for the opening of the Parliament session as an employee of the United States Congress. And I spent 3 weeks in Hungary and had a chance to meet basically every member of the Hungarian Politburo. As a matter of fact, we had a lunch and a dinner in the Hunters Hall of the Parliament. And I was just hammering away on my topic that, how happy I am. And I told them very frankly that I think that the most important thing that I accomplished since I left Hungary was finding the church, joining the church, and having my family raised in the spirit of the gospel. And they were very surprised, and of course they drank a lot and smoked a lot around me and couldn't understand. Here's a person born in Hungary, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and doesn't even womanize. Of course, I didn't do those things even in Hungary. I hated alcohol. I never tried smoking, and I got to know my wife when she was 15 and I was 16, and she tells me, of course, now that she was too immature to reject me, and I realized that it's not a good choice for her. Okay. The second man in command, Mr. Beretz, who is the secretary of the Central Committee for Ideology and Propaganda, took me aside, and he was my professor at the university. He taught foreign policy, mostly with heavy emphasis on U.S. and British foreign policy. He took me aside and told me, tell me more about those Mormons. And I knew that his wife just died in a horrible car accident. She was driven by a chauffeur. It was foggy, and the chauffeur did not see a truck parking without lights in the middle of the road. And the truck just split the limo, and she died instantaneously. And he has been in a very bad emotional state. And I started to talk about the most important mission of the church, namely doing missionary work for the living and for the dead. And I told him that I have been a temple worker exactly for that purpose in the Washington temple for over 8 years, and I'm proud of that. They wanted to release me a couple of times because they felt that I cannot fulfill other church callings, but I always told them, that as much as I don't like to reject any church calling, but if the choice is between my temple work and other work, if you don't let me do the temple work, I won't accept the job. And he, somehow he was impressed. He was impressed that here's a church which doesn't only deal in temporal affairs, but also in affairs of people who departed there. And he asked me about genealogy. He didn't understand. He thought, that we are some kind of outfit of the CIA trying to collect all the records of mankind and then, spy on everybody, living and dead. And that's interesting. That was the most difficult thing to bring by, not just him, but the Hungarian authorities. President Kandi knows that was what they couldn't understand, genealogy. So anyway, I came back, reported to Elder Nelson, and Elder Nelson outlined the conditions that are needed for him, namely an official invitation by the Hungarians to President Benson to come to Hungary and negotiate. We had that invitation, and then the rest is history, and President Kandi knows it. Nelson came with President Kandi and President Twinger, and everything went just fine. Yes?
You said that told them that you thought Hungary was the best place to start in the year of the church. Why do you think that, besides the fact you're Hungarian?
It did not play a role that I was born in Hungary. As President Kandi knows much better than I do the conditions in Eastern Europe. Poland has a very heavy, a very influential Catholic Church. Czechoslovakia has a very oppressive communist regime which is trying to decide whether to acknowledge 68 and Dubček or brand Dubček an aberration and say that Gorbachev is the true prophet of communism. Romania, the Ceausescu clan, it's also a very problematic thing now. East Germany is fairly rigid. So I found that all the conditions, namely that there hasn't been a dominant church, despite the fact that the Catholic Church is the most numerous, but the Catholic Church has never had major influence in Hungary, that the Hungarians are not Slavs, that they feel surrounded by Slavs, that they feel that they always belong to the West, that they have the most developed sense of democracy, of individual freedom. Hungarians are very individualistic, more so than the Poles even. And I felt that the regime is in such a desperate need for money and markets which they cannot get in Western Europe because of the EC's policies, but only in the United States, that I felt that that's our best shot. And honestly, regardless whether, I was born in Hungary. Yes, please.
What role do you see trade playing in all of this, and what kinds of things may happen in terms of trade with Hungary?
I don't want to sound cynical, but as long as communist countries suffer, the church will do extremely well. In the sense that as long as they need Western investment and trade in order to facilitate hard currency earnings, we are safe. And because I'm a firm believer that these regimes cannot become healthy unless we support them, I think that the church will be safe for a very long time. Yes, please.
What is the legal role of other churches in Hungary, like the Catholic and the Baptist? Are they legalized and recognized by the
Yes. You see, going back to the 19th century, at that time in Hungary you had recognized and accepted churches. Okay? And those, after the communists took over, became all, legalized, subjugated, for sure. They have, the same rights as our church does. So they have limited rights because, they cannot participate in any politics at all. And as I said, they are heavily intimidated, controlled, and supervised by the authorities. Yes, please.
You mentioned that the message of free agency is seen as revolutionary. How does the regime permit a revolutionary doctrine that can change everything or even welcome it, as you suggested?
Basically, Elder Nelson referred to two sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, the 129 and 31. 131, basically saying that church members are admonished to be good citizens and not to take their church membership as a political one. And that was one which almost created a riot at that fireside, and President Kandi knows Nelson told the participants that the church does not condone political activities, and we are here to do spiritual work exclusively. I don't think that the fears of the Hungarian authorities has been allayed by that explanation. I am getting information that people who are visited by missionaries are also visited by the Hungarian secret police, which is a kind of missionary work, I guess. The missionaries are shadowed. But Elder Nelson's opinion is the following, and I guess I can't quote him. He said, "That's what we want, because we have nothing to hide. So as long as they spy on us and realize that we are really not doing anything else but spiritual work, they are welcome." So, yeah. I'm sorry.
You started out your talk mentioning the conditions that you thought would create a need and a desire on the part of the Hungarian people for the gospel. And of course the regime cannot, at least officially, recognize that those types of needs or those types of desires even exist. Now you already mentioned that they are looking for trade relations with the West. But as you're aware, one of the first laws in international politics is regimes act in their own self-interest.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you think the Hungarians are looking for out of recognizing the church? Certainly they're economists enough to know that the church is not going to bring them all kinds of money. I get a feeling that they're looking for something else.
No, actually, the problem of the Hungarians, the Hungarian government in the United States, has been that they didn't have anybody whom they could talk to, and they have had a very limited access to congressmen, to the State Department, and no access at all to the White House. When they wanted to obtain an invitation from Mr. Gross, they had difficulties to get to the White House. It was an elaborate scheme, they devised to get the attention of the White House and get the president to issue the invitation. Now, they researched the Mormon church very carefully, and they concluded that the church is really there to do the work of the Lord, that the church does not encourage political activities in the sense of being obstructive or oppositionist. They realized also that the church is an economic and financial power in the United States. They also realized that a lot of us work in Washington and have, to various degrees, some influence and impact on the foreign policy making process. And also that members of the church are very industrious, and some people like Nolan Archibald heads Black & Decker, and that Kay Whitmore is heading Eastman Kodak, and they ask for a list. And I must tell you, they asked for a list, and we had problems with that to give out that list, and finally Beverly Campbell, who keeps that list up to date, obtained Elder Nelson's permission, and they were equipped with that list. And as a matter of fact, Black & Decker just established an office in Budapest, and it was not for other reason, but for the recognition. So they don't expect, obviously, they are not stupid, that now suddenly the United States will open up. But they felt that the Mormons are so homogeneous, holding together and helping each other, that that would be a very safe bet to try. I don't know whether there's something.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, that's lady whom I cut off.
I kind of have a two-sided question. If the church, or if the government has researched the church and what we're like, and they're surely aware of temples,
Yeah.
has there been any discussion with the government about temples? And my second question is, since there's a temple in East Germany, why hasn't there been more progress in regards to missionary work in that country?
Yeah. The second, I don't know. It's not my responsibility. You should ask President Neuenschwander, who succeeded President Conde. The first question, as a matter of fact, we took them through the Frankfurt Temple before it was dedicated. We invited the entire Hungarian delegation, and we spent 5 days with them. As Nelson flew in, and we went through the Frankfurt Temple. And they were just, they were very impressed. They liked it. We took them to the genealogical library of the church in Frankfurt, and there we had the same CIA spy connection raised. And we had difficulties, but they went through the Frankfurt Temple, and Elder Nelson personally explained them the purpose of the temple. I'm very impressed. Yeah, please.
Could you give us a few numbers, sir, on full population of Hungary, and then what is the statistical numbers of LDS in Hungary, and how many missionaries are there? We had a gentleman talk about this a few weeks ago here, and he wasn't quite sure about the statistics.
I guess President Conde is more confident to say that. Did we have about 24 known members in Hungary? 24?
A year ago.
A year ago.
Peter Vargas said that they're running around 50 every Sunday now.
The church acquired the building, the so-called Rothschild Villa in Budapest for 18 million forints, which is about $360,000 or $70,000. It's one of the nicest buildings in Budapest. And my understanding is also that usually they have 50 members and about 20 or 30 visitors, so it's, the attendance varies between 80 and 90, which is a good attendance initially. The population is over 10,000, but decreasing.
10 million?
Over 10 million, I'm sorry, but decreasing.
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 How many missionaries did you say?
I'm sorry. I guess we have now, I don't know exactly. Do we still have the two missionary couples?
Just one couple right now.
The McNamara's. The Johnsons left.
Yeah, they just got home. And these two young brethren over here, why don't you stand up, elders? They're going to be over there in November. And that'll bring the force up to 4 elders. We had 2 missionaries who weren't full-time missionaries, the Smiths, Marvin and Grace Smith. He was at the National Academy of Science in Szeged, and they traveled around Hungary on weekends fellowshipping people, and they were great missionaries, though they weren't officially called.
I see. Chris Jones is still there and told the elders that he learned Hungarian thanks to Christina. Well, and he's doing extremely well, and he's enjoying his mission. Yes, please.
From what I understand, the Soviet regime and Gorbachev is kind of using Hungary as an example of what they would like to see their policies move in that direction. Do you think that the church's presence in Hungary will have an effect on the Soviets' viewing of religion and the church in particular?
I hope you are not tainted by the liberal press making that comment on Gorbachev and Hungary. I think, that conventional wisdom is mistaken. And maybe President Conde has a different opinion and agrees with me. I don't know, but my opinion is that Hungary is a small country. The Soviet Union is a huge country. Certain elements of what the Hungarians did might be attractive for Gorbachev, particularly in the agricultural sector. But listen, Hungary is bankrupt. I mean, Hungary went through the same steps Gorbachev is proposing now in the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia went through that self-management scheme that Gorbachev is trying to introduce in the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia is bankrupt. As a matter of fact, Yugoslavia is at the brink of total collapse. The collapse of the state authority and the party authority right now. So if Gorbachev thinks so, I mean, he's not as smart as our liberal press presents him, and it would be absolutely, I mean, just look around. I mean, all those countries attempting that kind of limited reform, which limits itself to economic affairs and doesn't touch the political sphere, failed. These countries are indebted. The economy is in ruin. I can go on and on and paint in the blackest picture the situation. So I hope that he's smarter for his own sake and for his people's sake, not for the West's sake. As far as the second part of the question is concerned, I think that the Soviet Union will be the hardest nut to crack because, just frankly, we have no leverage. Very small countries, as I said, we can use some leverage, but with the Soviet Union, there's no leverage. Please. No.
But on the church model, has the experience of the church in East Europe and in East Germany and in Hungary possibly opened some doors in the Soviet Union? At least they're aware of it. Elder Ricker told us in a meeting that the Soviet authorities had questioned East European authorities about the church. And this past Sunday, a member of the First Quorum Assembly told me that there had been an invitation from the Minister of Religion in the Soviet Union saying, "Why aren't you here? Let's talk about things," which seems to me amazing.
The second half, I know exactly, it hasn't been an official invitation so far. I mean, they are talking a lot, but that's not an official invitation.
But discussions?
They communicate. I know that the Hungarians went to East Germany and talked to the East German authorities, and Mr. Bonovich visited the temple in East Germany, in addition to the temple he went up to Poland, for example. And I know that the Bulgarians now, before the upcoming visit of Elder Nelson, went to Hungary. So there is communication, you're right, but the second part, it hasn't been an official invitation. The gentleman is, yeah?
I've read several social studies that claim a positive correlation between Protestant growth and LDS church growth. Can you tell me how the Protestant churches are doing there as far as...
Extremely well, and that was, I didn't want to go on and on, but that was one more reason for you that I thought that Hungary's Protestant religion came to Hungary through the teachings of John Hus, who was a Czech. Usually Hungarians don't listen to Czechs, but John Hus, maybe some of you know, was burned on the cross in 1420. That was the conclave of Constance by Sigismund, who was that emperor of the Holy Empire, and his followers rebelled. And they were called the Taborite because it was the Mount Tabor where they assembled. And I don't want to get into it, but they fought the Habsburg armies. And of course the Habsburg army was stronger than the Taborite. And the way they fled southeast. What was that? Hungary, at that time, was Hungary, Transylvania. Okay? And the religion spread like fire, converting almost everybody from Catholicism to what the Hungarians call the Reformed Church. And there was a rebellion in 1436 already by Budai Nagy Antal, as Christina knows, which was exactly the rebellion of the Protestants, the newly converted, against the Catholic landlords at that time. And then, the religion spread to Hungary proper too. Particularly was strong the spread of the Protestant, the Hussite teachings during the partition of Hungary, where Transylvania remained an independent principality, paying taxes to Constantinople. Then the middle part was occupied by the Turks, and the western part came under Habsburg domination. So when the Habsburgs cleared up Hungary in 1668, they reconverted the Hungarians into Catholicism, because almost the entire Hungary became Hussite. Okay, so that's why one of the reasons why Hungary, Catholicism, although it came originally from Rome by the way of Saint Stephen, later it was looked upon as imposed upon Hungary by the Habsburgs, who were hated until the reconciliation in 1867. But I don't want to go into Hungarian history. But you were right, that has been a very important factor, because they are more receptive than those, I say, in Bavaria or Italy, for example. That's correct.
I'm sorry, I think we're going to have to end there. Thank you very much, Miklos.